I was still seated when my mother leaned in, lifted her mug, and said, "Watch this." The room smelled of coffee and polished wood. Conversation stalled. The liquid splashed over my hair and sweater, hot, then cold, sliding down my spine. "That's how we treat trash," she said, clear and proud. Phones rose. Screens glowed. I didn't shout or defend myself. I stood left, cash behind, and walked out alone, unaware this quiet exit would be filmed, posted, and recognized by strangers. Before I go deeper, hit like and comment where you're listening from, and if you've ever been publicly humiliated by family, share survival here. My name is Mia, and I work in cybersecurity. I'm in my early 30s now, old enough to know who I am, young enough that my family still talks to me like I'm a phase they expected to outgrow. I live in a large city, in an apartment that's quiet and clean, with furniture I bought because it lasts, not because it looks expensive in photos. I drive the same car I've had for years. It starts every morning. That's always been enough for me. For my family, it never was. To them, success has a costume. It has a logo, a price tag, a steering wheel you can recognize from across a parking lot. If you don't look successful, you must not be. And if you don't perform it loudly, you're embarrassing everyone else. My mother has always been the director of that performance. Every gathering is staged, every detail controlled. She doesn't ask how you're doing, she scans. Clothes first, then posture, then what you can brag about. She believes shame is motivation. She calls it teaching. My older brother, Kevin, my mother's favorite, learned that lesson early. He loves an audience, loves jokes that land at someone else's expense. My sister Melissa follows whatever makes the table laugh. My youngest brother, Daniel, just copies whoever's loudest. None of them ever pushed back, not once. The only person who never joined in was my grandmother. She's the reason I kept showing up at all. When I was younger and told my family I wanted to work with computers, they laughed, said it wasn't practical, said it wasn't a real future for a girl. My grandmother didn't say much, but she helped me anyway, quietly. Tuition, groceries. A note slipped into my bag that said, "Keep going." That's why I went to the brunch. Once a month, same country club, same long table, same forced smiles. It's where my family pretends we're close, where they measure worth in what can be compared out loud. I hadn't been going regularly, but my grandmother asked. She wanted everyone together. She's getting older. When she asked, I said yes without thinking. I wore jeans and a sweater, nothing flashy. I arrived alone. As soon as I walked in, I felt it, that familiar tightening in my chest. The sense that I was already failing a test no one had explained. I should have trusted that feeling. Because the moment I sat down, I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was a prop. The brunch moved the way it always did, like a script everyone but me had memorized. Plates clinked. Mimosas refilled themselves. My mother sat at the center of the table, shoulders back, voice just a little louder than necessary. She asked questions that weren't really questions, statements dressed up as concern. Kevin started it. He leaned back in his chair and smiled at me like he was about to perform. He asked if I was still driving that old car, the one that refused to match the rest of the family. Melissa laughed before he finished the sentence. Daniel glanced at my shoes, then at my face, waiting to see how I'd take it. I answered the way I always do. Calm, short, polite. That seemed to irritate my mother more than any argument ever could. She compared me out loud. Kevin's latest deal, Melissa's new kitchen, Daniel's recent trip paid for by our parents. Each example landed like a quiet accusation. Look at what they can show. Look at what you can't. When my aunt asked what I was working on, I barely got a sentence out before my mother cut in. She waved her hand dismissive as if swatting a fly. "She's still on her computer," she said. "Always has been." A few people smiled. Someone snorted into their drink. I felt my grandmother's eyes on me. She didn't speak, but her hand tightened around her napkin. That was the only warning I got. My mother stood up, not abruptly, deliberately. She lifted her mug, glanced around the table, and said, "Watch this." There's a strange silence that happens right before something breaks. I heard it then. The low hum of the room dropped. Even the servers slowed. The coffee poured over my head and down my shoulders. I smelled it before I felt it. Bitter, burnt. My sweater darkened. Liquid pooled in my lap. My mother didn't flinch. She didn't rush. She made sure everyone saw. "That's how we treat trash," she said, clear and steady. For a moment I waited, for someone to stand up, for someone to say stop. No one did. Instead, phones came out. Kevin was first. He laughed as he raised his screen. Melissa followed, angling for a better shot. I saw Daniel hesitate, then lift his phone too. Around the table, small red lights blinked on. Recording. From every angle. I looked at my grandmother. Her eyes were wet, her mouth pressed thin. She didn't move. She was 90 years old and tired of fighting battles she never won. That was when it hit me. This wasn't a loss of control. This was entertainment. They weren't embarrassed. They were proud. They wanted proof. Something to replay later. Something to show other people and laugh about. I stood slowly. My hands shook, but my voice didn't come out. I didn't give them anything else to film. I placed cash on the table for my meal. I nodded once to my grandmother. Then I walked away. Behind me, I heard laughter. I heard someone say, "This is perfect." I didn't know yet how perfect they thought it was. I didn't know where that video would end up. But I knew as I pushed through the doors that this moment was not staying at that table. The air outside felt colder than it should have. I stood still for a second, coffee soaking into my sweater, my skin sticky and tight like I didn't quite belong in my body anymore. The doors closed behind me, muting the laughter. That sound stayed with me longer than the stain. I sat in my car and didn't start it. My hands rested on the steering wheel, fingers numb. I didn't cry right away. I just stared through the windshield at people walking past, normal people having a normal Sunday, unaware that my entire family had just turned me into a joke. When the tears finally came, they were quiet. No sobbing, just that heavy pressure in the chest that makes breathing feel optional. I wasn't crying because my mother poured coffee on me. I'd survived her words my whole life. I was crying because for a split second I had believed this time might be different. I had believed love would show up. I drove home, windows cracked despite the cold. The smell followed me. At my apartment, I peeled off my clothes and stood under the shower until the water ran clear. I watched the brown swirl disappear down the drain and felt something else wash away with it. Not anger, expectation. That night, I sat on my couch with a towel wrapped around my hair phone face down on the table. I didn't check messages. I didn't call anyone. I knew if I opened that screen too early, I'd either shatter or say something I could never take back. 6 hours later, the phone buzzed anyway. One notification turned into 5, then 10. My name, my face, the video. Kevin had posted it, a caption mocking me for thinking I was better than the family. Melissa shared it, adding that sometimes people need to be put in their place. Daniel reacted with laughing emojis. The comments started small. Family, friends, old acquaintances, people who only knew me as a holiday story. I didn't reply. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I blocked them all. That was the moment the countermove began, though it didn't look like one. It looked like silence, like restraint, like choosing not to wrestle people who wanted a reaction more than the truth. I made tea and sat by the window. Outside, the city hummed. Somewhere servers were copying the video, reposting it, moving it farther than my family ever intended. I didn't know that yet. I only knew one thing with absolute clarity. I wasn't going to chase my dignity back from people who enjoyed watching me lose it. The next morning I went to work. I answered emails. I reviewed plans. I focused on the systems I was building, the ones designed to protect people from being exposed without consent. The irony wasn't lost on me. But it steadied me. By the time my phone started ringing nonstop, I understood something my family never did. If you stay quiet long enough, the truth doesn't disappear. It gets louder. The video didn't explode all at once. It crept. At first it stayed where my family expected it to stay, shared between relatives, a few old friends from school, people who already believed whatever version of me my mother had been selling for years. The early comments matched the tone of the caption. Jokes, laughing emojis, little digs about how money changes people. I didn't read most of them. I didn't need to. I'd heard those lines my whole life, just usually without an audience. Then someone shared it outside that circle. I never found out who. It could have been a distant cousin, or a friend of a friend who didn't think it was funny, or someone who simply saw a woman being humiliated and felt that itch in their gut that says this isn't right. Wherever it landed, it landed wrong. The tone changed fast. The jokes disappeared, replaced by questions. Short at first. Is this real? Why is everyone filming? Then longer ones. That's abuse. Why is no one stopping her? This woman is being assaulted and her family is laughing. By the next morning, the video was no longer being shared with captions. It was being reposted with explanations, with outrage, with pauses and arrows and people zooming in on faces at the table. Someone slowed it down frame by frame. Someone else stitched it with commentary. I still didn't respond. I went to work like normal, sat in meetings, reviewed timelines, drank bad office coffee. Every so often my phone buzzed again, a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, a DM that started with, "I'm so sorry," a notification from a platform I barely used. Then came the moment my family truly lost control of the story. Someone recognized me. It wasn't dramatic, no announcement, just a comment that got pinned, then screenshotted, then repeated. A name, my name, followed by a question mark. Within hours, it was confirmed. Links appeared, old interviews, panel photos, clips from conferences, articles mentioning my work in cybersecurity, my background, my projects. People connected dots my family never bothered to learn. The narrative flipped on its head. This wasn't a random woman being put in her place. This was a professional being publicly humiliated by her own family. The headline started careful, then sharper. Family brunch turns into public humiliation. Video sparks debate on emotional abuse. When private cruelty goes public. I didn't reach out to journalists. I didn't need to. They found me anyway. Emails piled up, calls from numbers I didn't recognize, messages offering help, damage control, crisis management. I ignored most of them. I released one short statement through a colleague. Nothing emotional, nothing accusatory. I said I appreciated the concern that it was a private family matter and that I was focusing on my work. That was it. That silence did more damage to my family than any angry post ever could have. Because while I stayed quiet, the consequences started landing. Kevin was the first to call. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail, his voice unsteady, explaining that the video was being misunderstood, that it was taken out of context, that people online didn't know our family dynamic. He asked me to say something, anything to help him. I deleted it. Melissa tried next, not directly, her husband called. He sounded rehearsed, polite in a way that made my skin crawl. He said Melissa was devastated, that this wasn't who she really was, that their friends were asking questions, that her reputation was being damaged unfairly. I blocked the number. Daniel sent paragraphs. Apologies tangled with excuses. He said he'd just followed everyone else. That he never meant for things to go this far. That his coworkers were recognizing him. That his boss had asked him into a meeting. I didn't reply. My mother was last. She called from a number I didn't have saved. When I answered without thinking, her voice snapped sharp immediately. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't apologize. She said this was my fault, that I needed to fix it, that I needed to tell people she was joking, that I was too sensitive, that I always had been. I listened until she ran out of breath. Then I said calmly that the video showed exactly what happened, that I didn't post it, that she did this in public, that the internet didn't twist anything, it just saw it. She told me I was destroying the family. I told her I wasn't responsible for cleaning up a mess I didn't make. I hung up, and for the first time in my life, I blocked her too. The fallout didn't stop there. Kevin's job became a problem. Clients recognized him. Reviews appeared online asking whether the man laughing behind the camera was the same person handling their business. His employer distanced themselves quickly. A statement about values, about conduct, about professionalism. Kevin was let go within days. Melissa's life didn't implode all at once, but it cracked. Invitations stopped. Friends went quiet. Her husband's career stalled in ways that don't show up in emails but linger in closed doors and missed opportunities. He blamed her. She blamed me. Daniel's job disappeared overnight. The company said they couldn't employ someone who publicly celebrated abuse. He tried to explain. It didn't matter. Screenshots don't care about intentions. My mother didn't lose a paycheck, but she lost something she cared about more. Her image. The board she sat on asked her to step down. The friends she hosted stopped calling. The country club reviewed her membership. People who once nodded politely now crossed the street. Every person who lifted a phone that day felt something slip through their fingers. Meanwhile, my life moved in a direction I never expected. People in my industry reached out, not out of pity, but respect. They said they saw how I handled it, how I didn't spiral, how I didn't weaponize the attention. Investors wanted meetings. Partners followed up faster than usual. Someone told me they trusted my judgment more after watching how I stayed composed under pressure. I thought about that often. The same silence my family mocked had become my strongest signal. The video kept circulating for weeks, then months. It never fully disappeared. It just settled into the background, a reference point people recognized. Sometimes quietly, sometimes painfully. My family thought they were exposing me. What they really did was document themselves. They showed the world exactly how they treated me when they thought no one important was watching. They just didn't realize how many people were watching, or how fast the story would slip out of their hands. By the time the noise finally faded, the damage was permanent, and the balance of power had shifted for good. When the noise finally settled, what remained wasn't victory. It was clarity. Kevin drifted from one short-term plan to another, each ending the same way. Melissa's circle shrank until it fit inside her own living room. Daniel moved to a different city, hoping distance would loosen the shadow that followed him online. My mother stopped hosting, stopped posting, stopped being invited. The performance she'd curated for decades lost its audience. My grandmother stayed close. We talked more in those months than we had in years, sometimes about the past, sometimes about nothing at all. She told me she was proud not of what I'd built, but of how I'd carried myself when it mattered. She said dignity has a way of outlasting noise. Work steadied me. Meetings felt purposeful again. Conversations were cleaner. People who reached out didn't ask for explanations. They offered collaboration. Funding came together faster than expected. Partners showed up prepared. When setbacks appeared, they were technical solvable. Not personal, not cruel. I didn't celebrate my family's losses. I didn't need to. Consequences had done their work without my involvement. I never posted a rebuttal, never shared screenshots, never corrected the record beyond that single calm statement. The truth held on its own. Some nights I still thought about the table, the phones, the moment I stood up, not with anger anymore, but distance, like a scar you forget until the weather changes. What surprised me most was the relief, the quiet that followed cutting ties I'd been dragging for years. I learned something simple and hard to accept. You don't heal by winning an argument. You heal by walking away from people who need you small to feel tall. And once I did, my life finally had room to grow. I used to think revenge meant shouting back, proving them wrong, making them hurt the way I did. I was wrong. The real power came the moment I stopped performing for people who mistook cruelty for love. If you've ever been humiliated by family and wondered whether staying quiet made you weak, know this: boundaries are not silence, they're strength. If this story hit close to home, share your experience in the comments, let others know they're not alone, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story.